They laughed at him. Not quietly, not behind closed doors, but openly, like the decision was obviously foolish. He had just spent millions of dollars on something they believed had no value, a frozen land, distant and disconnected from everything that seemed important at the time. To most people, it wasn't an opportunity. It was a mistake. Newspapers mocked it, politicians questioned it, and the public turned it into a joke. They called it Seward's folly, naming it after William H. Seward, the man who stood behind the decision without trying to silence the criticism. But the story didn't begin with him. It started much earlier, in a place far colder and far more uncertain. Russia owned Alaska, but ownership did not mean control. The land was vast, difficult to manage, and almost impossible to defend. After the Crimean War, Russia understood something it could not ignore: they were vulnerable. If another conflict emerged, especially with Britain, Alaska would not remain theirs. It would be taken, quickly and without negotiation. The distance, the isolation, and the lack of military strength in the region made that outcome almost certain. So the question was no longer about holding on to Alaska. It became about avoiding a complete loss. Keeping it meant risking everything for something they might not be able to protect. Losing it meant gaining nothing in return. That left only one real option: turn it into something useful before it was gone. The solution was quiet but deliberate. Sell it, not out of weakness, but out of calculation. The United States became the obvious choice. It was growing, expanding, and far enough from Britain to shift the balance of power. More importantly, it was willing to listen. Negotiations were not dramatic or public at first. They happened in controlled conversations, carefully managed and intentionally quiet. Over time, a deal took shape. The price was set at $7.2 million, a figure that seemed significant. But not enough to convince critics that the land was worth it. When the agreement became public, the reaction was immediate. People didn't try to understand the reasoning behind it. They dismissed it. To them, Alaska was nothing more than an icy wasteland, no cities, no development, no clear future. It was too far away to matter and too empty to justify the cost. The idea that it could become valuable seemed unrealistic, almost absurd. The criticism wasn't cautious or measured. It was confident. They believed time would prove them right. And for a while, it seemed like it did. Nothing changed. The land remained cold, quiet, and largely ignored. There were no sudden discoveries, no rapid development, no visible return on the investment. The silence of Alaska became part of the argument against it. People pointed to that silence as proof that the decision had been a failure. But time doesn't always move in obvious ways. What looks empty can still be waiting. What seems useless can still hold something unseen. And eventually, something shifted. It didn't happen all at once, and it didn't begin with certainty. It started with discovery: gold. The Klondike Gold Rush changed everything. The same land that had been ignored suddenly became a destination. People moved toward it, drawn by the possibility of wealth hidden beneath the surface. The conditions were harsh, the journey was difficult, but the promise of gold was enough to override both. Movement replaced stillness. Opportunity replaced doubt. The narrative began to shift. But even that was not the full story. Gold changed perception, but it didn't define the land's true value. Beneath the surface, there was something more, something larger and far more significant. Oil. Massive reserves, hidden and untouched, waiting to be discovered. When those reserves were eventually found, the meaning of the land changed completely. It was no longer just a place of temporary opportunity. It became a long-term asset, a resource with global importance. At that point, the criticism that once surrounded the deal began to fade. Not because people openly admitted they were wrong, but because there was nothing left to argue. The evidence was undeniable. The land that had been dismissed as useless had become one of the most valuable acquisitions in history. The laughter stopped, replaced by a quiet understanding that the decision had worked. What made it powerful wasn't certainty. There was no guarantee at the time of the purchase that gold or oil would be found. There was no clear roadmap showing how the land would become valuable. The decision was made based on positioning, timing, and the willingness to act before the outcome was obvious. And that is what changed everything. Not immediate results, not visible success, but the ability to move before the value revealed itself. One decision, made under uncertainty, shifted the future in a way no one at the time could fully understand. In the end, nothing about Alaska needed to be defended anymore. The land itself became the answer. The same place that was once mocked, dismissed, and underestimated no longer needed explanation. Time had already done the work. And the people who once laughed simply stopped.